Mhm. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another podcast. Today, we have the pleasure to interview Joana Araujo Pescarini, and I had a good time saying her name. Thank you so much to Dave Christmas, who gave us her recommendation. She was number one on his list on someone that's really inspiring and for us to interview. So we're really excited to have her on today.
Thank you.
And Joana has 20 years of experience with Schlumberger. She's had 10 different HR positions in 8 different countries. Joana brings a wealth of knowledge when it comes to personal development, managing people within different cultures, and how to develop talent within your organization through building trust, relationship, and manager skills to fit each employee's unique background. Now, Joana has her own private practice where she provides executive coaching. I mean, I can see why Dave recommended you. Amazing background.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
Thank you. Well, Joanna, let's dig right into it. We want to get to know you a little bit better. So tell us a little bit about your childhood and how that shaped you to become who you are today.
Well, I was born in Brazil and in Rio. So I'm a carioca, true carioca, beach lover, carioca. So So I lived in Brazil all throughout my childhood until I was about 10. And that's when my father got his first posting outside of Brazil. So we went to New York. And that kind of initiated the story of my life in terms of moving around, you know. So then we went to New York, and that was both exciting and terrifying at the same time. So we went to New York. So we lived there for about 3 years. So my dad, my mom, I have 3 sisters, and we had some cousins come over as well. So it was a big party all the time. But yeah, no, it took some adjusting, which later on helped me as I adjusted to all the rest of the moves that I had. So then after that, I moved back to Brazil and finished school and went to university in California. So I went to Pepperdine University in Malibu, California. So not a bad place to be. Yes, I know, huh?
And what did you study?
I studied business with a minor in HR. Yeah, so I majored in business, and there you had a minors in, you know, marketing, finance, etc. And HR was one choice. So that's what I did.
So how did you end up in oil and gas exactly from Malibu?
Yeah, so that's an interesting story because after university, I went back to Rio. I started working for Coca-Cola actually for about 6 months. And at that time I got called, I had given my CV to several recruiting companies, etc. And one day I got called to this, you know, interview process for a company that I could hardly pronounce its name. So I said, you know, so why not go? So I went along and I did my thing, you know, and they called me, and I'm like, and I was like, really, maybe I should, you know, kind of look a little bit deeper into who these people are because I have no idea, right? Yeah. So then a friend of the family at that time, he was the president of Shell in Brazil, right? So I said, maybe I'll give him a call. And he recommended it eyes closed, you know. So so I said, you know, why not? So the career prospects were good. They were, you know, what got my attention was the fact that they were truly international, and, you know, it was a practice of theirs to hire new recruits, etc. So, you know, it kind of it all matched up. So there I went.
And so was that your first job outside?
Yeah, so I was working for Coca-Cola at the time. Mm-hmm. It's not in an internship, but it's like an apprentice program. But then I decided to leave to join Schlumberger. So yeah, it was just a few months in Coca-Cola. Yeah. So
okay. How was your first trip with Schlumberger? Because I believe, didn't they first send you off when you were hired?
Actually, I started in Rio. So I started in 1996. And at the end of 97, I got my first transfer out. So I started off as at the time they called personnel rep. So I started off as personnel rep, and then, it was a little bit under 2 years that I was in Rio. They transferred me to Paris, which wasn't so bad, to do compensation and benefits for West Africa. So although I was living in Paris, I was spending 80% of my time in Luanda and in the other West African countries. So that was, I think one of the best times in my career, I have to say.
Wow.
Yeah.
That has to be a big change to go international and then to be dealing with compensation and benefits in a total different culture. What was that like?
Yeah. Total different culture. And, majority of the countries in West Africa, okay, Angola is Portuguese speaking. The rest were, French speaking. So that was that as well. And I remember at the time we were implementing SAP. So wow. I was going around implementing, doing the comp, part of the SAP implementation. And it was, I was in my late 20s or in my mid 20s at the time. And it was like an adventure, right? I mean, I was just open and willing to learn. And I was like, embracing everything that was coming my way. Not to say that it was easy, because it was tough sometimes. I was alone. I was single at the time. I was alone there. There weren't any Brazilians around. Although in Angola, I felt very comfortable in that environment. Mm-hmm. But it was tough because there was the social aspect of being in a place that it's entirely new. And then there was a job aspect, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I was familiar with Brazil in terms of compensation policies, HR policies, etc. But now I had to learn a whole new myriad of policies, regulations, structures. So yeah, it was tough, but it was very much fun. I loved my time there. Yeah.
So we read your article, which, by the way, for the listeners, we're going to link it below. It's amazing from the beginning to the end, everything about your life story. And in the article you mentioned, you've dealt with a lot of change throughout your last, 20 years in your career. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming every move, every country is always a different challenge. And for most people, change is different and it's hard. And some people cope very differently with it. And in the article, I was really surprised because you said it doesn't ever get easier. Just because you've moved a lot around, it doesn't mean that it's just, oh, I can do it all the time. It's actually challenging. How do you cope with that? And how did you train yourself, I guess, to be able to do all these changes and still be successful? And then what was the most challenging move that you did in your career?
Oh, okay. So how do I cope with it? So my first move from Rio to Paris, and I was looking after West Africa, I was actually, looking forward to a change, right? Going international was a big reward for, having performed well, etc. And if you got to go, into an international posting and start developing an international career, that was a big recognition from the company. So I was looking forward to it. So therefore, when it did happen, I went through the change curve a little bit faster, from the two beginning phases to the last two phases, which are exploration and commitment, right? So that what that tells me today is that, since it was a change that I was expecting, and to some extent I was kind of longing for, when it came, you know, I didn't really go through that denial and resistance phase, you know, in facing that change. While as an example, later in my career, we moved to Mexico for 10 months, well, actually 9 months, and then we had to move out again. That change was much harder for me to cope with, although I had been already by this time in Schlumberger about 18 years or 19 years. It was harder for me to cope. Why? Because it was unexpected. I could not control it. You know, it came as a surprise, you see. So what I have found is that, at least for me, I dealt better with changes that I had somewhat influenced throughout my career, that I had been part of throughout my career, as opposed to changes that just kind of landed on my lap and I had to deal with it, right? Although the moving thing, I don't know, you kind of develop this longing for change. You know, you spend 3 years, 2-3 years in a place, at least with me, and I was like, okay, so what's next?
What's next? You know?
Yeah. So it doesn't get easier, because I think as you grow and as you evolve and as you build a family, etc., there are other factors to consider during these changes. But I truly feel that, at least for me, when I was part of creating the change, it always was easier for me to cope with it. Yeah.
On the topic of family, when did you have your first child, and did that really impact you? Like, how did that impact you, and did that affect your next move when Schlumberger might have approached you and said, hey, now you got to go to X, Y, and Z? Did that, what were your considerations then, as it was different since you had a family?
So I have to say that it was my first real heartbreak story, and I'll tell you the story. When Lucas was born, so my son, my first one, it was 2005, and we were in Venezuela. Although he was born in Brazil, we were in Venezuela. And I was doing a project because I was about to go on maternity leave. So I went on maternity leave. And so then, 5-6 months into my maternity leave, they called me, or I called them, but they decided to give me, a great job, which was Latin America training, development, recruiting, and diversity manager. Okay. And that was like, wow, I love that job. I love that idea of a job. The only caveat was I had just had a newborn. We were living actually in Maturin in Venezuela, and the job was in Rio, right? So I'm like, I can do this, not a problem, right? So and why the heartbreak? Because I remember, the job was in Rio, so I had to travel quite often. I was looking after Latin America, so there was extensive traveling involved. And I remember, I think it was the first or the second time that I left home for about, I usually left for about 10 days, so I could do like a full round, 10 days, 2 weeks maximum. Once I came back home, and my son Lucas, he just would not come to my arms, and that was like, wow, that was a knife in my chest. Yeah. So when you have a child, at least for me, when I traveled, I left home already thinking of the moment that I would come back home and I would hug them and etc. And I came back, running to him, and he just turned away.
Who are you?
He's like, who are you? You're not my mother. You have not been here for the last couple of weeks. So I don't want anything to do with you. And he was like 6 months old, right?
Yeah.
And wow, that was a big heartbreak. But so then I started thinking about this. And today when I think about it, it's like, you know, with every choice, you renounce something else, right? It was my choice to go back to work. And it was also my choice to accept the position that they gave me in Rio, right? So it was a new sensation. It was a new feeling, this thing that, okay, wow, now the compromise, I really have to balance things out, right? I'm really, I really need to figure out how am I going to handle, you know, this, you know, family work balance and not be miserable, you know. And that's one of the biggest tricks, or not tricks, but, you know, the biggest challenges in dual careers, right? Yeah. And I truly believe, one of the things that I truly believe in, for a dual career to be successful, there are a couple of things that you absolutely need, and that is constant communication, not only with your partner, but with respective organizations when you're not in the same organization. And the next thing is willingness to compromise. And the compromise doesn't only come from the dual career themselves. It actually comes from the different organizations as well. Because if you think about my position, it would have been better for Schlumberger if I was based in Rio. Mm-hmm. It would have been better for me, baby, if I was based in Rio. But I was in a dual career. My husband was having, you know, his job based in Venezuela. So everybody had to compromise a little bit to make it work, right? Mm-hmm. So I guess that was the answer to the first question. The second question, I'm sorry, I forgot.
I forgot too, but I want to hit on a topic that you've mentioned. So it's worth mentioning, you know, with the dual career, it must be very difficult as well, in the sense that you both want an opportunity at keeping up with your careers and being successful and moving up within the organization. But that's usually, you're being pulled in both different ways. And you're more in the HR function. I'm assuming he was more in the operations side. So it's like completely, you know, different. What would you say? Because I think it would be very difficult to kind of try to balance both careers, you know, because I feel like, is there a balance, or do you always have to have one that's going to be leading the other's career, or how do you manage that?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about this concept of, you know, career lead and career follower, etc. What I've seen is that you know, at times one of the partners is leading, at other times the other one is, right? There might be a position identified for one of them, and, you know, the other one might need to compromise on what he or she will have to do, you know, to be able to allow this other person to, you know, take this step up, if you will, right? But as I said, I think, you know, it would be unrealistic to say that, you know, you get the best of both worlds all the time, right? Mm-hmm. That's simply, I haven't, you know, it can happen, and that's what we should always aim for, right? We should always aim for the best alternative, the best solution possible for both, but in that not being a possibility, then there needs to be an understanding first within the couple themselves as to, you know, what am I willing to compromise? What is my husband willing to compromise, right? And that kind of dialogue needs to be constant, right? Because, you know, even if, for example, if you get a promotion tomorrow, what does that mean for your husband? So don't just wait for, you know, for the situation to show up, and try to anticipate, try to have that dialogue beforehand, so that, you know, and try to work out scenarios, right? So that when the situation does present itself, you are more grounded as to, okay, he wants this, I want this, and therefore, I'll need to compromise, or he will need to compromise, and you take turns. This is what I've seen has worked for me. It's not easy, but I've, throughout my career in Schlumberger, in this case, Wallace, was able to continue, ascending the career ladder. And I always felt very, very challenged and very enthusiastic about the jobs that I was offered, right? So it worked for me.
On the subject of your positions, you held 10 different HR jobs. Was it difficult to try to be impactful in each position since you kept moving? Because I've always heard that you spend so much time in one area, then once you got it right and you got it rolling, then you're moving to the next area. So how did you cope with that? What did you do? Did you feel like you still were impactful during those times?
So in that respect, I think impact, having an impact is how you define it for yourself first, right? If you come into a job and you want to just kind of restructure, how your whole remit is done in 2 years, that's probably not going to happen, right? Because there are things that you can be impactful on, like more that are more short term, that are others that are more long term. I have found, so I've had primarily two types of roles. So I've had, kind of frontline, what we call frontline HR, or, HR management type roles. And I had a lot of training and development roles. And in these roles, your impact are quite different, right? And when you're in frontline HR, you're impacting one person at a time, right? You're trying to improve people's, careers and people's roles, and how, accomplished they are and how much value they add, one person at a time, right? And getting to know these people and understand what their needs are, what needs of the organization are, so that you can mix and match and impact in that way. In training and development kind of roles, I felt that the impact was much more aligned with the programs that I was, putting out there, and some that I was championing. And, you're impacting on a learning and growth kind of, area. I like to think that, I went into every job convinced that I could leave a legacy, right? And I think that when you embrace a job, or when you accept a job, going in and being fully committed to one, doing your best, and really, making something better than what it was before, then I think you've left your legacy. Whether that is a big change or a smaller change at individual level or team levels, So, but definitely this constant change does imply that, does imply maybe that, you're not seeing things through to its fruition, right? So yeah, so maybe you're not benefiting from seeing the full cycle, but still it's there, so.
Gotcha. No, very good in-depth conversation, and then, like, everything you say, it really opens up our eyes to, a different way of thinking, which is really interesting, especially because none of us have been in an HR role or kind of have seen that side of the business. You mentioned in your article that often managers believe that they are in a better position to define what is best for their employee's career, but that it could be a trap, and that you have fallen in the trap as well. Can you expand on that? Because I do see that a lot, where a lot of the career changes and positions that they think are really great for you are not always what's best for us.
So I'm not sure that I've fallen in that trap myself. Oh, I've probably fallen in the trap that sometimes I felt that my perspective could have been more wide for such person's development than their own. And, you know, that's wrong. That's wrong, right? I think that depending on where you are in the organization, you might have more visibility of opportunities that are out there, right? Of what it takes for you to go from, you know, a junior type level role to a more senior type level role, right? But that does not mean, so that perspective, that visibility that you have does not mean that you know better what is the best for the employee without understanding their own perspective, the employee's perspective, the employee's circumstance. People's circumstances, they change. People change, right? People's priority changes, you know. You might have a newborn, or you might have been completely mobile, but now your boyfriend, as an example, is you have a boyfriend first, and he's working in a certain city, and therefore you're questioning your mobility, you see. So what I find sometimes is that, you know, we really need to focus on having these conversations, not to make assumptions on others' behalf, despite how well-intentioned we are, right? Because I think managers are generally well-intentioned about, oh, you know what, you know, let's say Jamie, she doesn't want to do supply chain, but Jamie wants to get to this level in the organization. And I know supply chain is important for Jamie. So that's what I'm going to put her up for. But it's fine. The intention is great. But unless you validate it with the employee, with the understanding that the employee's circumstance, perspective, you know, family, you know, family situation is okay for that to happen, then you know, it, you know, all your good intention can go to waste, right? And the employee can feel frustrated.
Exactly. They can feel like they weren't actually heard to begin with. And then you give them this promotion that you thought was going to make them happy. And then they're like, no, this is completely the wrong path.
Yeah.
And you know, this in the way I see it, it's communication, right? And more than that, it's about having difficult conversations, right? It's when you're having a difficult conversation with an employee, with a manager, is when we learn and we grow, when we develop, and when we, you know, transparency, I think in these cases is key. So, yeah.
Wow. Well, so I had I'm assuming this was a very difficult decision, a very impactful decision in your life, but after 20 years of working in the same company where you're very comfortable and your husband also works there, what made you, like, was it one day, tell us a little bit what made you decide to leave, and what was the idea behind it? And how long was it a rapid change, like from, you know, 1 month to the other, you said, I saw the light, I got an idea, this is what I'm going to do, or was it incremental?
No, it was gradual. It was a gradual. So I remember having some conversations with some more senior HR, you know, people in Schlumberger, about 2 or 3 years before I actually left. And so there's a few things to consider here. So one is that, as I said before, dual careers are tough to manage, right? And at one stage, you know, you need to compromise in order for the other, partner to have their go at, whatever ladder they're climbing, right? So there was that aspect. The other aspect was that I, towards the later stages of my career, I became a lot more interested and really enthusiastic about this whole people development aspect. And when I started, I did some teaching. I facilitated some courses towards the end of my career there in Schlumberger. And I had to teach, principles of coaching, right? I'm like, what? Okay, let me look into this. And I started reading, and I started really getting more interested in the power of coaching, right? Mm-hmm. And coaching is about people development, one person at a time. Now there's team coaching, so a few people at a time can be as well, right? Mm-hmm. And towards the end, I felt like I was no longer in the driver's seat, right? I was, riding the car, fun ride. I felt like, I was enjoying myself. I felt like I was adding value, but I was no longer in the driver's seat. And I wanted to take back control. I wanted to be back in the driver's seat. Mm-hmm. And coaching was really my pool, right? So then so we were in France, we went back, we went to Mexico for a few months, 9 months. And then on the transition back to France, it was that moment where, okay, is this the right time for me to go and get back behind the wheels and really take control of what I want to do for the rest of my life, right? Mm-hmm. My ambition was not so much about being an area HR manager or segment or, a VP of HR. My ambition was not in that direction. So I felt that I was in my early 40s. So I felt that it was an opportune time for me to just think, take back control, and really align what I was going to do for the rest of my career more with my purpose, right? Mm-hmm. With the legacy that I wanted to leave, just in general, right? So I'm very much fond of this idea that if you're living your purpose every day in the job that you do, you're much happier doing it. You're much more efficient doing it. It's just it just changes the whole dynamic, as opposed to just having a job, right? Mm-hmm. You're living your purpose, and this is what I wanted for me. So it was a gradual change, but it felt like a divorce. Yeah. Really it is. You're part of a community, you're part of a structure. These are your friends, there's your support system, and all of a sudden you're on your own, and it's daunting. It's absolutely daunting. You felt like, oh my God, the floor opened and I'm on a free fall, and how am I going to get out of here? So it was, you asked initially, what was the biggest changes in my life that were the most challenging change in my life. So one was when I had my first baby and accommodating to that. The second one was this transition, from a corporate world into having my own private practice. So
during this transition phase, did you have mentors that were helping you along the way?
I'm not sure I will say that I had mentors. I had supporters. Mm-hmm. In my career, well, yeah, I have my definition of what a mentor is, right? Mm-hmm. in my career, I had mentors throughout my career, but I also had sponsors throughout my career, which are quite different, right? In this transition, I it was a ride that I needed to take on my own.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the first things I did is I went out and I got a coach for myself, right? Because
Coaches need
if I
coaches.
think
Yeah.
exactly, if I think coaching is beneficial for other people, me, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure I had a mentor at this particular time, but I had mentors throughout my career, and the value of the mentor, the way I see it, is that you can show your vulnerability to mentors, right?
Mm-hmm.
To your mentor. And I believe, a good mentoring relationship is one where there's not a lot of room for judgment, right? Your mentor is kind of like a sounding board,
Mm-hmm.
And it's a person that you go to for advice. But when you are trying to define what your purpose is, I'm not sure advice is what you need at that specific time.
Mm-hmm.
So not during this transition, but I've had some wonderful mentors throughout my career. Yeah.
Wow. So right now you're doing full-time Holyspring consulting, and you're taking on clients, right? And people who want coaching and mentorship, correct?
More coaching. More coaching. Mentoring, I think it's a mentoring relationship. It's based a lot on on trust, right? And some sort of bond. So it, the way I see it, it's harder to craft or to formalize a mentoring relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's why companies have so much difficulty in creating these mentoring programs, right? It's not easy. Coaching is primarily what I do. So it's in essence, it's being a bouncing board. It's being a vehicle through which people will work through their own issues, problems, ambitions, and helping them finding their own answers, as opposed to giving advice. And
Gotcha.
yeah.
Wow.
Close, can you give our listeners some advice that maybe you didn't learn while in the job, but you learned outside, that somebody might not be able to get unless maybe they experience what you experienced, which is multiple countries, multiple cultures, all different around the world. I mean, a lot of people don't get to see that. Can you share just a few of your top advice or tips to our listeners?
Wow. Okay. So the first one, I guess, it's back to change, and it's about being open, right? Sometimes life will throw you curveballs that you really don't think that you can hit them,
Mm-hmm.
but you can, right? If you believe that you can, and second, you want to be able to do it, right? I think a lot of people, they have this what I see is that some people might be stopped, might be taken back by some limiting beliefs in terms of what they can do, what they can cope with, and therefore they don't show up, they don't go out there and embrace all the change that might be coming their way. It's not easy, but most of the time we can do it. It's just being open to it. In terms, and I guess the other thing I would say is I wish I had earlier in my career, I wish I had worked or reflected a bit more on my purpose. What is my objective as Joana, not as Joana, the HR person who works in Schlumberger, that today is here, the other day is there, right? What is it that I value? What is it that that I want to accomplish? What is the legacy that I want to leave? One day when I'm, at my funeral, what do I want to be remembered for? Right? And to live that daily, as opposed to, having, again, that curveball thrown at you and then having to kind of react and see, what do I stand for? Who am I to some extent, right? Because after 20 years in an organization, what I felt was that, I had become a mold of what, corporations expect of, a mode of what is acceptable behavior in organizations, how you exchange, how you talk, how you present yourself. And if that mode is very much aligned with my essence, great. But if it's not, then you need to go back to that essence, right? You need to go back to your raw self and ask yourself, I guess more so than not, am I living the life I want, as opposed to, am I living the life that's being presented to me? I guess that's what I would have.
I love that. That's an excellent way to end this podcast.
That was amazing.
Find my purpose.
I know. I'm listening to you thinking, oh my God, yes.
we might both just, start our, we need to start thinking about these things. And I agree with you.
Food for thought, right?
It is a good food for thought. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. We super appreciate it. This was excellent. If anybody wants to reach out to you, we will make sure to leave your email as well as your website where they can contact you. And again, thank you so much. We're honored to have you on here.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you, guys.